My God, Arcwing on the land, just...
I cannot wait to see it all come together.
You guys did an amazing job.
Thank you.
It was pretty amazing. Like, it's a whole new direction for Warframe, and all this. You got all these other games coming out that have, stuff, but this one's free.
In 2017, free-to-play gaming truly came into its own as a respected business model for video games. For a long time, MOBAs like League of Legends and Dota had been the only notable free-to-play games in town, and then Hearthstone came along and added to that roster. But there were two other games lurking in the background, biding their time and waiting for their moment in the sun. The first was Path of Exile, the classic Diablo 2 inspired action RPG that's gone on to win the hearts of Diablo fans, where Diablo 3 failed to do so. This year they announced their biggest expansion ever, bringing 6 new acts of content to the game, as well as massive changes to their endgame systems. The other game lurking was Warframe, the sci-fi action RPG from Digital Extremes. Warframe launched into open beta on the 25th of March 2013 and saw a release on PS4 and Xbox soon after that. The problem was that the game was woefully lacking in both content and in tools that directed players towards that content. If you played Warframe back then as I did, you likely did what I did, which is throw your hands up in confusion and walk away from the game. Only, not everyone did that, and those that stuck around bore witness to one of the most striking transformations in gaming history, seeing a game evolve from something so wholly incomplete and anemic, turning it into one of the greatest action RPG games on the market today. But despite all of this, Warframe was still considered the underdog. It was one of the top 10 most played games on Steam, but no one seemed to be really talking about it. While Destiny was getting all the kudos of being this genre-defining sci-fi shooter, Warframe was quietly toiling away in the background, growing its presence almost in secret until this year, at TennoCon 2017, when the floodgates finally seemed to burst open. Digital Extremes announced its Plains of Eidolon update, a major free expansion of the game that would deliver an open world environment for Tenno to explore, new bosses to fight, a new weapon crafting system, in-game fishing and mining, and much, much more. And with that, it really felt like Warframe had finally made its debut. Everyone was talking about it, and it prompted people like me to return to the game and give it a second chance. With so much attention and so many new players joining the game, the stakes were high for the Plains of Eidolon. DE had gone to unprecedented lengths to hype up the release, as far as putting a giant billboard in Times Square to mark the occasion. And there was a competitive pressure as well. Destiny 2 was set to release on PC on the 24th of October, and DE were keen to ship their update before the biggest AAA game of the year landed on PC. In a practically unheard of move, the game's developers were actually live streaming the final hours of the pre-release testing. You could literally watch them identify and fix bugs ahead of pushing out the client to the PCs. You could tell that it was really coming down to the wire, and while all of us were desperately hoping that DE would get it right on release, I think most of us knew that we were in for a bumpy ride. The phrase, "it's coming in hot," gets bandied around a lot in video games development, and never has that been more true than in the case of the Plains of Eidolon. In my view, the Plains of Eidolon update is ultimately the tale of a game studio unaware of how big their game has now become and unprepared for the scale of their achievement. Stuff that would fly when the game was a scrappy indie title with a loyal following hiding under the cover of beta status doesn't fly when you have 35 million registered losers and you're the 4th most played game on Steam. The update's innovation and imagination is matched only by the failure to ensure that new game systems actually work, that they are introduced to players properly, and that they are integrated into the broader reward loop and economy of the game. The Plains is unquestionably an ambitious update that adds more to the game than any update before it, but it's difficult to not contextualize these contributions as potential rather than being fully fledged, fully realized game systems. There's a great update lying under all of the bugs and confusion, but we'll have to wait for the debris of this hasty launch to clear before we can fully see it. And today, I want to offer my thoughts on both that greatness and that debris. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you my review of the Plains of Eidolon. I'm out on the plains solo. It's my first time out solo, and I'm keen just to soak up the experience. I have a low-level bounty mission which shouldn't prove too difficult for me, even though my mesa isn't max level yet. I see an encampment off in the distance, and it's go time. I bullet jump into the fray and begin to kill everything I see, just like I've done a million times before in my 350 plus hours with Warframe. Only this time, it's not the same. It's actually very different. Where in the rest of the game I can typically park myself in a small room or corridor and just press 4 to win, I can't do that now. Now there are enemies above me, flying overhead and peppering me with bullets. There's a large ship doing bombing runs back and forward across my location, making it perilous to stay out in the open too long. There are dropships coming in from every angle, dropping in more and more troops. There are mortars and machine gun turrets bombarding me constantly, and there are snipers stationed so far away that there's no way I can shoot them without a sniper rifle of my own, a weapon that rarely saw the light of day pre the Plains of Eidolon update. Of all the achievements of the Plains of Eidolon, I think that the changes to the core combat rhythm of the game stand out as the most successful. Unquestionably, combat in the Plains feels markedly different than it ever has before. For weeks or months or years, we've been playing in tight, tiny spaces. Warframe has been described many times over as a corridor shooter, and to this point that's been 100% true. But not in the Plains of Eidolon. Combat in the Plains is about looking around you and above you and toward the distant horizon. It's about meleeing a nearby enemy to then pull out your pistol to shoot an enemy circling above you, only to then pull out your sniper rifle and shoot the small platoon of Greniers sniping at you from a distance. It's a fundamentally different combat loop than we're otherwise used to, and I have to say that I absolutely love it. I think the best moment for me that I've had thus far was in the same encounter that you're watching now, when I surveyed my surroundings and I noticed that the cliff lining above where I was would put me at a huge disadvantage were any Grenier to spawn there, as they'd have a clear shot at me and I'd have the sun in my eyes. And just as I was having this realization, sure enough, Grenier dropped in and came over that ridge just as I hoped they wouldn't. It wasn't a hard fight, but I realized then that I'd thought about the terrain and the sun and my positioning and what would spawn and so many other things in that brief moment, and Warframe had never made me do that before. It was really, really awesome. The plains themselves are an absolute triumph. They are huge and so beautifully detailed. From Cetus to the encampments to oceans to different fishing spots, you can tell that the artists have just poured so much of themselves into this space. It actually really reminds me a lot of the open world of Zelda Breath of the Wild, where the topography of the landscape is the real star of the show. You get a sense of how space looks and feels, and it starts to become familiar to you the more time you spend there. And not in a crappy, I'm getting bored of this sort of way, but in a really appreciative, hey, I'm really starting to like this map kind of way. And there's a hell of a lot going on at all times as well. You typically step out with a bounty under your belt and complete that, and maybe you just like exploring the map, soaking up the open world and clearing the encampments of enemies while you do it. I have to say, I'm someone that really enjoys playing solo in most games, and I've really enjoyed just hanging out in the plains and getting to know them. It's a rare trick when it comes to open world design, to actually get a space that people want to be in and want to explore, and it seems like Digital Extremes have pulled it off here. And during that exploration, I get to determine the pace of the adventure, and whether it's wide open traversals or close quarters combat, I can choose what I want to do and when I want to do it in the plains. And that's a great feeling in a game that's typically been very heavy-handed with the way that it dictates the flow of combat and what I'm doing at a given moment. I'm always banging on about innovation in games. Games must never abandon the core that makes them great, but they must innovate and ideate and evolve on that core experience, and the Plains of Eidolon truly does that. The Plains could have very easily sucked. They could have just been this big, boring, uninspired area that betrays the core combat loop of the game, like Arkwing ultimately did when it was first released. But it didn't do that. It ultimately expands on the core combat loop that we know and love, and gives us something diverse and rewarding. And perhaps the best and most fully realized example of this evolution are the epic Eidolon battles. So let's now take a look at what's gone into them, and what they could mean for the future of Warframe. For a while now, Warframe has had a boss problem. The Law of Retribution raid offers a fairly straightforward boss battle after you've jumped through a bunch of hoops to get there, but the Jordas verdict is just... yeah. Here's Warframe YouTuber Magamu explaining how to kill the final boss of the raid.
Activate the vaporizer all the way to the bottom, wait for a teammate to shoot the SFH, they destroy the barrel so everyone can get in later, go back outside, activate the vaporizer, hack the console, move the container back, fill the vaporizer, hack the console, fill the vaporizer next to the console, go back outside, shoot the golem in the back and the boosters, and you win. Good game.
Now, if that sounds to you like the idea of fun, then I've got some IKEA furniture that I need building. There are so many great examples of what good endgame encounters look like out there in the wild. The raid bosses of World of Warcraft are the obvious go-tos, but the looter-shooter genre also has its own success stories. Borderlands had some really awesome bosses, and its expansion packs were often centered around these endgame encounters. Destiny had absolutely fantastic raid bosses, striking the perfect balance between being fun and being challenging. Destiny's first 4 raids were some of the best endgame experiences you could have on a console, and if you haven't yet experienced them, I recommend you go back and do so. And Warframe as a game has always seemed so ripe for mechanically deep, epic, endgame boss encounters. You have all of these different Warframes with different abilities. Some of them are tanky, some of them are more melee focused, some of them are DPS casters or utility or healers. You've just got all this flexibility with, damage and resistance types and augments and just so many things. It's like a Dungeons and Dragons wet dream that DE have never really seen fit to fully explore for reasons that have never really been clear. But it seems that that's starting to change with the Plains of Eidolon update. Meet the terrorist Eidolon, for which the plains are named. The majestic, heinously malformed beast appears only at night on the plains when most of the Grineer have gone to sleep. And it's a good thing too, because you're going to need a lot of space to bring this guy down. And the right team composition. And some lures to keep him locked in place. And some strong ad management to stop the shield from replenishing. And a whole bunch of other stuff, which I won't even go into now. The fact is, this boss fight, the Eidolon, is just awesome. There's so much baked into it at any point, but it doesn't feel hopelessly convoluted and impenetrable like the Jordas verdict does. It just feels like the way it should feel. It just feels exactly right. This is the way that a Warframe boss should feel. It's an encounter that ramps up in difficulty as you progress through it and continues to ask more of you without ever overwhelming you or providing unfair instant death conditions. It's just so great, and the developers have already said that we can expect new open areas and new bosses very soon, so that's really encouraging. But part and parcel with the design of the Eidolons is the Focus 2.0 rework. Now, for those of you that haven't yet finished the second Dream quest, I'd really recommend you jump to this part of the video on screen now, because I'm going to talk about some stuff that you aren't going to fully understand, and it's going to spoil some really crucial story stuff that you should absolutely experience for yourself firsthand. So that's your spoiler warning. I'm pressing on. Here we go. The focus schools unlock for you at the completion of the second Dream questline, and were essentially an endgame progression system for players who had maxed everything out. It gave your Warframe combat boosts like bonus melee damage or bonus energy regen, and it always felt fairly underbaked because it was hopelessly imbalanced, with some trees and nodes providing way more power than others. The developers had always promised an overhaul of the system, and it's finally arrived with the Plains of Eidolon. In short, the focus trees now focus on improving your combat prowess when you are in operator form. Our operators are a core part of the Eidolon encounters, since their energy is what's needed to bring down the Eidolon shields and destroy the adds. But the focus rework envisages a larger combat role for operators. Certain trees and nodes will grant you and your party buffs when you switch to operator mode. So if these bonuses are potent enough, the player is incentivized to switch back and forward between their operator, and the operator is a part of their general combat rhythm. So there's two big things to say here about Focus 2.0. The first thing is about the grind, which is absolutely crazy. Here is YouTuber MC Gamer explaining how long it would take an average player to max out the entire focus system.
I only ever get around 30,000 focus every day, which is a wee bit of a problem because if I bring up Mr. Calculator over here and we add in 100 million focus, which is roughly what you need to get it done, divide that by 30,000, which is roughly the amount of focus I get every day, and then divide that by 365, which is the number of days in a year, you will see that I will be done in a little bit over 9 years. Yeah.
With a goal that ludicrously unattainable, it really begs the question, what are DE hoping to achieve from this system? If the answer is that they want to provide players something to grind for, then they've really failed here because the grind is so unreasonably large that most players simply won't bother with it. If the answer is that they're asking players to make a decision about where they invest their grind, rather than aiming for everything, then they've also failed, because the fact is the trees and the nodes are all sort of interlinked by various ways, and players are really made to feel like they're missing out on something when they're not maxing out multiple trees, rather than feeling like they've made a good decision by investing all of their eggs in one basket. To be honest though, I'm actually not really worried about this. As I'll talk about later, economic tuning is the easiest thing to tweak in video games. I'm sure the DE are listening to player feedback here, and when they do choose to act, the solutions will be fairly easy to implement. What I'm personally more concerned about is the overall design decision to make your operator a central part of the core combat loop. In my view, Warframe's action, its combat, its power fantasy are simply the best in the business. I literally cannot think of a game on the market today that feels better to play, in terms of my connection to my character and how powerful I feel when I'm doing it. And that feel is about being in our Warframe. Our operators feel kind of crappy, to be honest. They can't jump, they can't really melee, they have very little energy with which to fire. For me, using my operator sort of feels like playing a mage when you're out of mana. I mean, you can do it, it's just really not fun, and you're really just waiting for that moment when you have your mana back so that you can keep dishing out punishment the way you're enjoying. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of this new direction for operators. I think the Plains of Eidolon themselves, the environment, has meaningfully expanded the core combat loop. But I think this doesn't do that. For me, Warframe's combat is simply too good for me to be constantly switching to an inferior version of it with my operator. I don't really have an alternative in mind for what the focus system should be, but I think that any system that is actively pulling us away from the power fantasy provided by my Warframe is inherently the wrong direction. And that's a far tougher challenge to solve than the economic tuning that the focus system is currently struggling under. And while we're on the topic of economies and game systems that pull us away from combat, there's a hell of a lot to say about the new, true endgame of Warframe, fishing. Here I am at my new favourite spot in the Plains of Eidolon, Dick Rock, named after Richard Rockford III, who discovered the rock whilst on a drunken fishing trip with his Orican buddies, and not because the rock looks like a giant penis. I'm here fishing away because I need fish. I need a lot of fish. I need fish for rep, I need fish for crafting new operator items, I need fish to use my Arcwing on the plains, I need fish so that I can craft weapons, I need fish so that I can make fish bait so that I can catch even more fish. Seriously. Now, there's two types of people in the world. There are people that like fishing in video games, and then there are people that don't. Those that appreciate it enjoy it for what it is in real life. A relaxed, almost meditative activity that allows you to just zone out the world and focus on the process of fishing. I wish I was one of those people. I am the other type of person whose brain seems to begin melting when I start fishing in video games. My idea of hell is to be working as a video game quality assurance tester at the future Electronic Actisoft conglomerate, where I'm forced to playtest the new Rice Gum loot box fishing simulator day in day out for the rest of my life. And of all the things that I just listed in this horrible image, the fishing part is the part that terrifies me the most. In my view, unless the game is an actual fishing simulator, God help me, then fishing in video games should only ever be a fun side activity that you can do during downtime for a few laughs. Back in World of Warcraft days, there was this raid called Serpent Shrine Cavern, and in between raid wipes, you could actually fish in nearby waters, and it was the best. I did more fishing in those caverns than I ever did in any other game combined, and I actually enjoyed it because I had nothing better to do at the time, and it just helped me pass the time while we were recovering between raid wipes, and it was just great. That's not how fishing has been implemented in the Plains of Eidolon. In the Plains, if I actually want to progress through its reputation system, and I want to unlock all of the stuff and craft all of the things, I need a hell of a lot of fish in order to do that, and that means hours spent standing by lakesides, hoping for virtual fish to swim by, when what I want to be doing is blowing stuff up as a space ninja. Gathering in video games is, in my view, one of the last great relics of the old MMO age that we have still not shaken off. Remember how games used to have lives? We got rid of those because they didn't make much sense and they weren't very fun. Remember when games didn't have autosave and we died only to lose all of our progress? Yeah, we fixed that too. Remember when health didn't regen in shooters and you spent the entire level save scumming or hunting for health packs? That's no longer a thing either, because developers realized that just wasn't fun. Gathering is the absolute antithesis of fun in video games. It's what I call eat your vegetables game design, where you make the player do something that they don't want to do because you think it's good for them or for the game. But in reality, it just makes us frustrated and bored, and we just want to get back to doing what we enjoy doing: combat, fighting, action, stuff, as quickly as possible. Those of you that ever played Vanilla Destiny will likely remember that a core part of the progression system back then was planetary materials. After you collected your awesome weapons from completing strikes or raids, like the fun stuff, you literally had to run loops around these big open areas collecting stuff just laying on the ground. You do these loops for hours on end until you got what you needed, and the excitement of every new drop you received was tempered with the knowledge that you would have to farm these horrendous loops in order to get the upgrade materials that you required. In Warframe, fishing and mining do something similar to what your operator does. It takes you out of the core combat loop that makes Warframe so magnificent. And this can absolutely be a good thing if it's done right, like fishing is, by the way. It's actually really well done. It's a really cool thing to throw your spear and get shit. It's really good, right? But the sheer volume of materials required from these activities is just too much, and it asks the player to step away from the core of the game more than it should, in my view. I'm a space ninja, I'm not a fisherman or a miner. If I wanted to do those things for hours on end, I'd play Stardew Valley, not Warframe. And this problem is further exacerbated by the degree to which this whole new game economy, with fish and metals and gems and reputations and Eidolon shards, sits completely divorced from the broader game economy that is, in my view, so expertly designed and balanced at this point. The economy that supports the crafting of our frames and weapons is a mix of missions and alerts and extractors and sorties and raids and relics and ducats and guild stuff and all sorts of stuff, and it all clicks together so perfectly. Before the Plains of Eidolon, anytime I did anything in Warframe, I was progressing in almost all parts of Warframe simultaneously. Now, when I step into the Plains and spend time there, I'm really only progressing in the context of the Plains. I feel like I'm putting my meta progress on hold when I go there, which I think is absolutely the wrong direction, given how functional the whole of game economy has been to this point. And the problem is made even worse by how unbelievably stingy the bounty rewards are in the Plains. I mean, have you guys seen these rewards? You can spend like 20 or 30 minutes completing a 4 or 5 stage bounty and you can literally get like 2,000 credits at the end of it or some endo. These bounties, they feel longer and they feel more difficult and more epic than the missions we run, but the rewards just aren't commensurate with that, and they really feel like a total waste of time outside of the rep that we get from them. And by the way, fishing is just a straight up more efficient way of getting rep anyway, so you may as well just fish if rep is what you're after. As I said earlier, the economics of rewards are easily tuned. When it's not about the game's structure and it's just about the numbers, you can just turn the dial up or down and get a pretty instantaneous result. But the economic structure of the Plains, its focus on gathering activities, and its isolation from the broader game economy, that's much, much harder to change or fix depending on how you feel about it. And I feel that this is where the most work is required. I'd hate to see the Plains buried as a footnote experience, something that held promise, but that couldn't deliver in a game where players had to be really focused about where they spend their time, since there's already so much to do and so much to grind for. The Plains is in itself an attractive enough location. We want to go there, we want to spend time there, it's really fun, it's really good. We don't need the game's economy forcing us to stay there, punishing us if we leave. As I begin to wrap up this review, I want to pause for a moment to talk about something that I know a lot of people were very upset about when it came to the Plains releasing, and that's bugs. Plains of Eidolon has further cemented the bug frame meme. There are bugs everywhere in this update. Everywhere. I experienced them myself a number of times, including when I had a combined total of 10,000 people watching me, hoping to get the Dawn's Early Light achievement Twitch drop, only to have it bug out on me and all those people ended up missing out. Bugs suck. But you know what sucks more than bugs? Developers who don't try anything new. Often, the bugs we experience in large-scale online multiplayer games exist because developers are trying something new, are pushing the boundaries of what's possible. And if I have to suffer a few bugs in the name of supporting that innovation, then I'm happy to do so. Obviously, there are limits to my patience. If bugs continue to plague an experience for weeks or months, such as in the case of The Division, then I'll lose faith in that developer to fix them. But DE aren't there yet, and it must be said that while PoE launched with a very large number of bugs, the team has worked tirelessly since launch to correct them, and they've made great strides. Bugs always suck, but they've certainly not destroyed the PoE experience for the overwhelming majority of players. And given how much new shit is in this update, and how badly it could have gone, I think it's to DE's credit that the situation wasn't far worse. For me, bugs didn't bother me that much. And even most of the other stuff that I've spoken about in this review, like fishing or mining or economic tuning or operator combat, none of it really bothers me that much. I can see the goal behind the decisions that were taken, and I'm confident that those things will improve in future. But there's one area where the Plains fundamentally disappointed me, and that's in the way that DE invited in new players into the Plains well before they were ready to step in there, further damaging what is already an extremely fragile new player experience, and increasing the risk that those newly arrived players will do what I did when I first played 4 years ago, throw up their hands and walk away in frustration. A few months ago, I did a video titled Masterstroke. It was a video essay on the fact that the incredible Second Dream and War Within quests were gated behind upwards of 100 hours of content before you could actually get to them. The content is so magnificent and so world-building that a lesser developer would have front-loaded it and restructured the game so that those quests would have been the first thing that new players saw. But DE didn't do that. They held back that content and made players work for it, such that when they finally got there and they learned all the secrets that these quests contained, and they saw how fundamentally core game systems had changed, they'd be rewarded for the incredible time commitment it took to reach them. It was a bold, uncompromising move that few developers would have had the courage to implement. But DE did not have that courage here. Conscious of how much new players would want to enter the Plains immediately, they invited players to enter the Plains almost as soon as they had completed the opening tutorial missions. Only no game systems were aligned to this objective. The currencies that new players would need to progress were not available in the Plains. Progress there did not contribute towards unlocking the junctions that gate new player progression. You're simply too weak to be able to complete anything more than low-level bounties there. Easily the most ludicrous example of this in the entire experience was the quest to unlock the new Warframe Gara, which when completed, revealed to players that they would have to farm thousands of kuva to actually build Gara, a resource completely unavailable to players before they reach the endgame. And that's ignoring the basic hand-holding that is entirely absent with the rolling out of new systems. It took me plenty of wiki research to figure out just how to fish, or mine, or build weapons, or get my Arcwing working, or understood how the new focus system works, or heaps of other stuff. If I found this difficult as a player with 350 hours under his belt, what possible chance would a new player have? With the Plains, DE compromised their restraint. They would have known that the Plains was no place for a new player, and yet they invited them there anyway. And I feel that even now it continues to hurt the new player experience, as I get dozens of questions from new players every day asking how to do things in the Plains that they really have no business doing until much further in the game. But more than just the Plains, the sudden influx of new players, literally double the concurrent player count record, introduces a new challenge that DE must now meet. Warframe has famously been in beta since March 25th, 2013. That's over 4.5 years of beta. It's a meme now, of course, but I suspect for DE it's also a protective blanket that they can wrap around themselves when they think about the identity of what they've built. It's the idea that it's okay to try out a whole bunch of experimental, disjointed and incomplete stuff because that's what a beta is for. But for me, the Plains of Eidolon marks the end of that beta. The announcement of the Plains at TennoCon lit a fire under this game and its community. The game is now the 4th most played game on Steam and amongst the top most watched games on Twitch. Warframe is no longer a scrappy underdog indie title, it's now a behemoth of the gaming world. And with that size and scale and influence comes a responsibility to deliver something that is equally rewarding to newcomers and veterans alike, and that brings a level of polish that will welcome new players rather than intimidate them. DE has built an incredible game with an incredible suite of systems. It's now time to harvest the value of those systems by A, finishing them, B, building the right pathways into them for new players, and C, building the right connective tissue between them so that they complement each other rather than sitting awkwardly adjacent and separate from each other. Here's the thing, and perhaps it's just my view as a newer player, but I don't really want much more content in Warframe right now. Sure, more open worlds and more bosses would be great, but I personally don't want any more game systems rolled out, because there are just so many of them now. What I'd love is for DE to put a freeze on all new systems and just focus on improving the ones they have. I want new players to feel welcomed rather than completely overwhelmed. I want the Focus 2.0 system to be awesome rather than just okay. I want the crafting economy to be on point rather than a horrendous grind. I want the operator combat to feel amazing rather than be a punctuation point in the overall flow of combat. There's so much there that DE could spend 6 months or even a year just fixing it up, and I'd be okay with that because the concepts underpinning each of these systems is so sound, so worthwhile. With the Plains of Eidolon, DE continues to set a new bar in terms of innovation and imagination. The game is fundamentally bigger and better as a result of this update. But where the update falls flat is in its ability to capitalize and deliver on the fruits of this innovation. The Plains is like a photography teacher who brings a $6,000 camera to class, hands it to their students and says, "Here you go, figure this out and you're a photographer." There's a million steps involved in the journey towards being able to take the perfect photo, and unless your teacher guides you towards that goal, the path of self-tuition is long and painful and frustrating. And while a small percentage of people may stick with it, the majority will just find themselves overwhelmed by the incredibly sophisticated contraption they've just been handed and will simply give up and walk away. With how much the Plains and Warframes as a whole now offers, it would be a shame to see so many people walk away from that experience. I applaud DE here. I would unreservedly say that this is a job well done. Now it's time to take a step back from the goal of more innovation and to spend more time refining the incredible suite of features into something coherent, cohesive and inviting. Do that, and Warframe will continue its incredible success story for many years to come.